Hello everyone, thank you for tuning in again. I am Kaylee Batesman, the Content Director at SheCanCode, and today we're talking about retraining as a software engineer in your 30s. Your 30s are an important time in your life. People tend to settle down, get married, have kids, see promotions at work, and their salaries increase. You might even decide that this is the time to change careers and try something new. That is exactly what the fabulous Beca Parker, mid-level developer at Redgate Software, decided to do, and I've got her here with me today to share her story. Welcome, Beca.
Hi, thanks for having me, Kaylee.
Thank you so much for joining us today. For our listeners who don't already know, Beca featured on one of our live webinars recently. She discussed her career switch and you can find that recording on SheCanCode.io. But for those who haven't seen that yet, Beca, can we kick off today's conversation with a little bit of background about yourself and how you got into tech, please?
Yeah, sure. I love talking about this because it's probably the best thing I've done in my life. So I'm very proud to chat about it. So I'd had various roles in my previous career before I moved into the tech sector. And, you know, I'd never really stopped to consider myself as someone who could be a software developer. I think because the subjects that I studied at school and the opportunities that I gave myself up until that point just hadn't really featured anything to do with coding or any kind of tech related work. That is until the pandemic hit. So if you've heard the webinar already, this is your spoiler alert, you've heard this bit, but during the pandemic, when we all started working from home a bit more, obviously, that's when I got an eye-opener onto what it was like to be a software developer, because my husband is a software developer. And so, you know, kind of hanging out at home together, I sort of realized, oh, that's what you do all day. That's not at all what I thought it involved. So it was a real kind of, what's the word, spontaneous or serendipitous introduction into what it would be like day to day to be a software developer. And I sort of, from that point, I was able to visualize, yeah, actually, that's something that I could do, and I think I would enjoy doing it. So once I'd seen what it actually involved, I suddenly, you know, started to visualize that. And so that's when I took the jump and retrained, which was a massive commitment. I have to say, you know, those of you that are out there thinking of doing it, there's a lot to weigh up. And I remember going through that process and thinking, right, is this the right thing to do? Is this the right time to do it? But I'm so proud and glad that I did do that, because now, you know, I get paid to do a job that I love doing, a job that, you know, I'm learning stuff all the time on the job.
What did you think it was going to be like when you spoke to your husband? But well, I suppose, what did you think your husband did before?
Yeah, I had this really strange misconception, but I think it's quite a shared misconception. Like, people might recognise this kind of bad stereotype of coders that sit in a dark room by themselves, like hunched over a keyboard and just tapping away all the time by themselves, or that they're all kind of, I don't know, somehow like child geniuses and have been coding since they were 4 and published their first app and all this kind of stuff when they were from a very young age. And that's just not the case. I don't know why I had those misconceptions, and I'm so glad that I was able to have the opportunity to smash them, really, and find out what it really involves. Yeah.
We hear a lot as well. I mean, you're saying about you being a young child there. A lot of young children, they don't tend to think of tech as a career path for them, which is a shame, and it's obviously something that the industry is trying to encourage. What did you want to be when you were younger? You can say princess or whatever it was you wanted to be.
I remember the very first thing that I wrote down in primary school, when we had to draw a picture of ourselves of what we thought we would be. I remember drawing a ballerina on a mountain, because I really loved being outdoors and climbing, and we'd been on family holidays climbing in the mountains and things. But at that point, I was also, you know, keen to go to my ballet lessons on a Wednesday after school or whatever it was. So I thought I'd be some kind of mountaineering ballerina. But then more seriously, when it came time to pick, you know, GCSE subjects and A-levels and things like that, I was very much focused on languages. I really enjoyed French and Spanish at school, and I was lucky enough to go and do those at university as well. But having chosen that quite early on meant that I'd narrowed down, well, at the time when I was at school, I don't know if it's different now, but you know, you really had to kind of narrow down fairly early on. So by the time I was 16, 17, I'd already, you know, stopped doing any STEM subjects really. And so I think that's what gave me this false idea that, oh, because I haven't pursued that in an academic sense, I haven't got any academic qualifications in those subjects past, you know, beyond, you know, what everyone had to do at that age. We all had to do maths GCSE and maths science. Yeah, I thought, oh, I can't become a coder, so I never really thought about it.
You have to almost choose your career path so early, and nobody has come in to chat to you about certain careers. Then, you know, you kind of take what you've seen and that's it, isn't it? And that's not always the tech industry.
I think that's changing more and more, and for the better, that people are getting more exposure to the different options that are out there. Secondary school kids, I think, have a lot more options than perhaps I did when I went to secondary school. But yeah, just being able to say to somebody, well, it doesn't matter if you don't have a degree in that, you know, in a technical subject, you can still break into the tech industry. I think that's quite a powerful message. Yes,
definitely. And obviously you retraining later in life, what kind of barriers and challenges did you find retraining? There must have been quite unique challenges for you doing that a little bit later in life.
Yeah, so by that point, obviously, I was in my 30s. As I said, I had done various other roles, so I kind of had a lot of work experience, real life experience behind me, but I knew I didn't have the technical qualifications, or how would I show an employer that I've got enough for them to, you know, to take me on in a technical role. So I spent a lot of time figuring out what would be the right course for me to do. So having, you know, parental responsibilities, my son was 9, 10 at the time. So I didn't want to have to commute down to London every day, because, you know, I think there's a lot of opportunities in big centres, big city centres, isn't there, where people can do face-to-face courses, particularly in London. There's various opportunities, which is great if you live in London. If you don't live in London and you can't, you know, commit 2 hours of your day to commute down every day because you've got, you know, someone at home who needs you there after school time and stuff. But luckily, the course that I was accepted onto, the Makers Academy Bootcamp, at that point they had lots of remote options. And I think that's thanks to the pandemic, really.
Yeah.
So just exploring what's out there and realizing that there was a viable option. I don't think I could have done it if it was an in-person course personally, because of the commitments that I had at home. So, you know, knowing that there's options out there, you just need to do a bit of research and find which one's going to fit in with your other responsibilities. Yeah, it's worth doing the research and finding out about the different options that are out there.
Yeah, it must be quite intense as well. I know some courses, you know, if you have to go face to face for your training, I mean, there's things like travel and paying for travel.
Yeah.
And, you know, all of that is, you have to pay for that. It's such a commitment on top of your boot camp. And, you know, if you're not getting paid, whereas at work you commute during the month because you know you're going to get paid at the end of the month. But when you're just training, you're thinking, my gosh, I've got to pay all this money to get to London for something, and you're not quite sure, you know, whether something will come out at the end of it. So it's this added expenses, isn't it? But
it can be a bit of a gamble, I think, for a lot of people. You know, you're weighing up, well, can I afford to do this at this time? I was lucky enough that you know, we had some money put by so I could cover the fees for the boot camp. But I think there are other options out there. I know there's apprenticeships and there are part-time options as well. So I think it's just a question of finding something that works for you. Don't give up till you find something that will work for you. I think a lot of places as well that offer these retraining courses do have schemes specifically aimed at, you know, increasing the diversity of the people that access the course. You don't get unless you ask. So, you know, you have to say, excuse me, do you have anything available to help someone in my situation I have these responsibilities? I really want to do this, but actually this barrier is stopping me from doing it. So, you know, you never know, they might turn around and say, well, turns out we have a scholarship for, you know, someone of your background, or you know, we don't, but we know someone who's offering an apprenticeship or, you know, part-time option that might be more viable for you. So yeah, there are barriers, but there's lots of ways to overcome them.
Exactly, yeah. And you mentioned that you started, you know, you started from scratch, and that you didn't have any qualifications before. Did you have any technical knowledge before, though? Had you given anything a go? Had you given projects a go? Had your husband set you a challenge? Had you tried anything?
Yeah. So before I seriously looked into retraining, no, I hadn't really. I had very little technical knowledge. I knew how to use Excel and make it do a few whizzy things, like I could do a pivot table or something. But other than that, no, I wouldn't have. I had never written a line of code when I thought actually I could be a coder. I hadn't written a line of code at that point, which sounds a bit crazy when you look back on it. But then, as you mentioned, like, you know, because I knew someone who was in the tech industry, my husband in this case, but you know, having someone who's in the tech industry or who wants to share their passion with you about it can be really powerful, because they can say, well, here's a really small encapsulated bit of project that you could do in half an hour or an hour and see a result. And it's really very eye-opening, and you feel a sense of achievement when you can see the, you know, your first bit of code compiling and doing the thing that you've asked it to do. And there's loads of opportunities out there to do it, lots of mentorship programs. I'm trying to think of some of the names off the top of my head. There's Code First Girls, there's Women Who Code, and just really supportive places that you can go and say, hey, I've never tried this, I'm a complete beginner, what should I start with? And you'll find that, you know, everybody's actually really friendly. They're not trying to elbow you out and say, no, there's, you know, this isn't for you. They want you to have a go. So yeah, use those opportunities as well.
Yeah, because I suppose, and you said you were lucky enough, you know, your husband was in it and you kind of could share that passion. But I suppose it's about building that network, isn't it? If you haven't got that, then, like you said, reaching out to other communities that are doing the same thing. Maybe, you know, like we run hackathons, and the hackathons, that the ladies that come, they've never been to a hackathon before in their life, and we love that. It's like they've just turned up for the day and they want to try something new, in a safe environment where they feel like they can do that. Did you attend any hackathons, or were they meetups or anything like that, where you got to expand your network kind of face-to-face occasionally?
Do you know what? Not until I started my boot camp, and even then not face-to-face. Yeah, I think, but that was partly because of the pandemic at the time. That was limiting the options. No, I think that would have been a great thing to do before I embarked on it. Yeah, because like you said, you can spark off each other, and I think definitely having an attitude of saying, well, what's the worst that can happen if I turn up and it's a, I don't know, an hour session in the evening? How long are your hackathons that you run?
We run them, they're an all day, so they go from sort of 9 until 6-ish. So, and you're grouped with other people that feel the same way as you. And by the end of the day, you can see that they're amazed that they've spent the day building something, you know, that works.
Yeah, exactly. So what's the worst that can happen? You lose a day of your life, but what's the best that can happen? You get a big sense of achievement that you can do it. You know, you get to build that network of other people who can mentor you through the rest of the process of, you know, retraining. I think that the mentorship and the network of other people who are either in the same boat or recently been in the same boat as you is really, really useful, because you don't have to pretend. You know, you can say exactly what you want to say and they'll understand, and everybody's there to be supportive. And you do get that with well, I certainly got it with the boot camp that I did. I'm still in contact with lots of the alumni, like people who've completed that boot camp, but also people who were thinking about doing it have contacted me on LinkedIn, or, you know, through other networks, and said, oh, I've seen you've done this boot camp, can you tell me a bit more about what it involved for you, or would you recommend it, what can I expect, that kind of thing. And yeah, there's one in particular person who sticks in my mind, who she contacted me just before she was thinking of doing it. And we had a good chat about what to expect and so on. And then time flies, doesn't it? So then it was within, you know, a blink of an eye, it felt like she'd finished her boot camp, because they're only like 12 weeks long or so, around about 12 weeks long. And she finished and she got back in contact and said, oh, I've just finished it. And I remember we chatted beforehand, and I'm thinking about applying for this job, and what would you recommend, and so on. And it's really nice to see, you know, how much she'd grown through the process of doing the boot camp. And we got together and paired on Zoom on a C# kata, because she hadn't done, although she'd done the boot camp, she hadn't done any C#, and that was one of the languages that she was thinking about working with. And it was just like, yes, I remember that, you know, when you just finished that boot camp and you're like, well, world's my oyster now. Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's nice to keep in touch with people like that.
Yeah, and to share as well after the boot camp where you go, what you do and how you feel, because, you know, I was speaking to a lady recently on here who said she retrained and then she went into work, but she actually joined as a junior because she tried something new, but she's been in work for years. So, you know, how did that feel for you? What was that like, you know, feeling like you're starting from the bottom again, but actually you've been in work for you was very experienced in the world of work at that point. How did that feel as a junior?
Yeah, that's the thing about retraining in your 30s or later, isn't it? That you've probably got, you know, some workplace know-how behind you. You're not straight out of uni or straight out of school, so it can be a bit weird, awkward, I guess, but actually it's a kind of a secret superpower if you join as a junior. So I joined Redgate as a junior engineer, and you can use it to your advantage, because you can say, look, you know, I'm a junior, could you just take a step back and explain that to me? Whereas if you go in as a, you know, as a mid-level or something else, you might feel that imposter syndrome kicking in, saying, oh, I shouldn't be asking that because I ought to know this. But you can use your status as like, you know, I've just arrived, I'm new to this, to your benefit. And actually the team, when I shared that with my work team, they said, yeah, but we really appreciate when you stop and ask us these questions, because it means that we have to explain it to you, so we get to understand the process a bit more in depth. We also hear the other members of the team, their explanation of it, so you get a deeper understanding of it from that sense. You know, you see different sides of the same coin. You know, and sometimes it helped them to stop and think, oh, actually, why are we doing it like this? There's probably a newer technology that can do this in a better way or something. So
yeah, they're not being as clear as they probably could be.
Yeah.
And as a fresh pair of eyes, you would notice that. And it's okay that you're asking. I mean, it's always okay to ask questions at work, but if you want to ask 1,000 questions, you can, because you're new and you're curious.
And my team were super supportive, because because they knew the route that I'd taken. I think it's just good to be yourself at work and be upfront and say, you know, I've done this recently. I've made this big change, because people are supportive, and if they're not, you know, then that's on them.
Yes, yeah, and I think you're in the wrong team then. I think you would quickly
realize
you're at the wrong company in the wrong team if you just suddenly realise nobody here is supportive.
No, exactly. I think Redgaters in particular are, I've found every Redgater that I've worked with to be really supportive. So, and there is no such thing as a silly question, you know, and you've got to be brave and remember that for yourself, because you can hear that little voice in your own head saying, oh, if you ask that, you're going to look really dumb. But that's just not true. It's just not true, you know. And sometimes, even if you don't feel confident enough to interrupt the flow of the meeting or whatever and ask it there and then, you know, just pinning it somewhere, writing yourself a quick note, and then sending somebody a side message on Slack or whatever, and just say, oh, you know, you mentioned such and such a thing, or you said we can use such and such an approach. Can you tell me a bit more about that? Because I haven't encountered that yet. You know, it's not at all it's not at all a disadvantage. I think it's actually a secret superpower to go in as a junior and have that
As a junior though, you must have noticed that there are transferable skills that you have brought across from previous workplaces. Is there anything that has really stood out for you that you think actually it's not just the technical skills that somebody would need, it's the soft skills and everything else that comes with just surviving in the world of work, I suppose?
Yeah. Oh, I love that you've asked that question. We touched on it a bit in that webinar that we recorded, didn't we? But yeah, I'll have the opportunity to dig into unpack those a bit further. So in the webinar, I think I mentioned my top 3 and I snuck in a sneaky 4th one. So we'll go through them. So collaborating is a top skill and that was the main thing when I mentioned that eye-opening experience of what it actually is like to be a coder. And it's not just you in a room on your own, tapping away, fulfilling tickets and fixing bugs all by yourself. It's absolutely not like that, especially at companies that work, with team-based development, like we do a lot at Redgate. So all of the code that we write is either paired on, so 2 programmers working on it together, or mob programs, so groups of programmers up to 4 or 5, I would say, depends on the task. And we're just working on it all together. One person's doing the typing and we rotate who's doing the typing, but everybody's contributing and kind of picking apart what we've got to do, suggesting different approaches that we could take. So there's a lot of collaborative work in programming, definitely. So having the ability to kind of ask clarifying questions of your team, or include perhaps the quieter members of the team to see what they're thinking, drawing from all those sources of information that are there in the team. Those are really important skills that you can bring from other roles that you may have done in the past. And then moving on to the second one. So the second top transferable skill, I would say, is being able to think in systems. And what I mean by that is kind of breaking a problem down into smaller, repeatable chunks, so that you can, if you're a coder, you can write a block of code that does that and you can reuse it. But then it also helps when you've got to kind of structure the project that you're working on, in terms of which blocks of code are going to interact with each other and how. So designing the interfaces and the APIs between the components that you're writing. I'm struggling because I often talk with C# terminology, but actually it's wider than that. But those concepts, I think, transfer to any kind of, especially object-oriented language. Yeah. So that's kind of like the system thinking side of it. I would say definitely, if you've ever done any kind of project management or been involved in any project or process in a previous role where you've had to kind of think about the most efficient way to do it, or who's the best person to do this role, or how can I get this done smart rather than having to do lots of laborious manual tasks. A lot of those kinds of skills will transfer to coding, or even designing for coding as well. So that's those 2. The third one I mentioned in the webinar, which isn't really, I wouldn't call it a skill necessarily, it's more of an outlook, is having that growth mindset. So being open to the idea that you're always going to be learning something new. And that's so true in tech, because the technology is always moving, right? So even if you think you're right up to date and you've got it all under your belt, you haven't, because it's all moving so fast anyway. And personally, that's something that I really enjoy, and that's one of the reasons that I did get into tech, is that I knew there'd always be something new to learn. And just kind of remembering that if it's new for you, it's going to be new for someone else on the team as well. So you don't have to feel, like just because you're a junior and you've got less experience than the other people on your team, you don't have to feel like, oh, there's so much to learn and I don't know this thing that's now coming along. So I think it could feel quite overwhelming, but if you just shift that mindset and think, all these new things I can learn and all these new things that my colleagues are learning alongside me, that's a great mindset to have. One of the kind of mantras that they taught us in the boot camp was, it's not hard, it's new. Because I think it can feel quite overwhelming to think, wow, there's so much to learn, and I don't get it. Like it doesn't sink in the first time you do it. You need to do it several times before you really understand it. I was talking to my tech lead yesterday about some videos and learning that I've been doing, and he was saying to me, so how, what did you get from it? And I said, well, I've got this level of info from it, but I think I'm going to have to rewatch it again in a few months' time, because it's like watching Toy Story. You can watch it as a child and there's one plot going on, but then when you rewatch it as an adult, you know a bit more. It's a whole different story. So yeah, there's that level of keep revisiting stuff, and you'll get a new appreciation for what you had got from it before.
I think you're absolutely right. It must be incredibly overwhelming, but also people just must feel like they're going to be at a disadvantage because they're starting something new, but and you're starting it a little bit later in life, but actually it's such an advantage for having all of that experience behind you, and as you said, all of those transferable skills that probably a lot of people haven't even realized they soaked up anyway along the way. And you're definitely not at a disadvantage there in trying something new. You mentioned a few little bits there about how you work at Redgate. Can you tell us a little bit about the most interesting projects you've worked on so far?
Yeah, sure. So I think it's probably actually the project that we're working on currently. So it is very exciting. I'm not really sure how much of it I'm allowed to share, but basically we at Redgate make database tools, right? So we make tools that help people who work with databases day in, day out to do their job more effectively, or to automate essentially a lot of the processes that they do, so that they're freed up to do more important things with their database that only a human can do. So typically, I think, people that end up using our products, the end users, are DBAs, so database administrators in big enterprises. Redgate has historically been a SQL Server tool shop. So we've made tools that work with SQL Server databases. But the world's shifting, and more and more enterprises are using different database environments, so Postgres, MySQL, etc. And I've got a really exciting job on our team at the moment of making those capabilities that Redgate already has, and the tools that we already have, work across different database environments. And it's something that we've really been able to get our teeth into as well, because as a coding problem, it's really interesting, because you have to build the components to do the tasks, need to be able to have versions of those components that will be compatible with these other database environments. And it's just really neat to see how the architecture's like slotting together, so that the tooling can be database agnostic and work across all these different database types. If you'd have asked me, like even 5 years ago, if I'd be saying that kind of sentence to you, what's the most interesting project you've worked on? And that would have been my reply. I wouldn't have imagined that.
You know what? I was just going to ask you that. Did you think a few years ago that you'd be, talking to me about database environments, and suddenly?
No, probably not. Yeah, but here we are. Had the opportunity last year to go to the Past Data Community Conference in Seattle, which Redgate's heavily involved with. And that's really cool as well, because the people that go to those conferences are really into the thing that we do. And they're our users typically, or sometimes they're not yet our users. You can talk to them about the products and they go, what? I didn't know that your product could do that. So it's really exciting to go to those kinds of things and interact with them, because it makes it all worthwhile as well, to see them getting excited about it as well, because they're our end user.
Yes, yeah, and it sounds like your day is incredibly varied and creative, actually. And you just threw in there that there's travel. I don't think a lot of people know all of that, do they? And unless you work in it, you kind of think it's going to be quite boring and dry. But nothing that you just described there sounded boring and dry. So.
No, it's definitely not boring. Every day is a little bit different. Yeah.
And in terms of advice for our listeners that are thinking about retraining, is there anything that you wish someone had told you before you retrained?
Yeah, it's quite cliched, but I would say I wish someone had told me earlier you're good enough and you can do that. I think it really helped that I had someone who believed in me and believed that I could do it. So just because of the circumstance, because my husband was already a software developer and he knew me really well, he was able to say, and he knew the role really well, he was able to say, these are the kind of problems that you like to get your teeth into. It's just you don't know that yet. It's, you know, he's seen how I like, what things I enjoy and what things bring a sparkle to me. And, you know, he was able to persuade me that I would be able, you know, you're going to be good at this and you're going to enjoy it. So I think I feel like there's probably thousands of people out there who haven't had someone to say, you can do this actually, and you will enjoy doing it.
Yes, it's just finding that, as we said earlier, whether or not if you don't have that at home, just reaching out, because the women in tech community in particular is very supportive of, you know, newcomers and people that want to retrain. So I suppose it's just reaching out to the right people, isn't it? Like the lady who reached out to you and asked you about your boot camp. It's just making that first connection, I suppose, and going from there.
Yeah, definitely. And if you haven't got someone you know personally, yeah, go out and look for that person and say, you know, I'm thinking about doing this. What should I know before I start? And people do want to help you, you know, there's lots of support out there.
And so we're nearly out of time, so I'm going to ask you one last question. But we all know that the tech industry has a shortage of women. What more can be done to encourage the female talent pipeline?
Yeah, that's such a tricky question. I think there's you know, there's lots of advice out there for tech recruitment in terms of really analysing each step of the recruitment pipeline and thinking about right from the job advert, is there something in this advert that is subconsciously putting women off from applying for this particular job? There are tools that you can use, I believe, to analyse the wording of your job adverts and the wording of, you know, the content that you're putting out there.
Yeah.
But I think even after that stage, you know, just making sure that you're not accidentally filtering out the diversity, right, you know, just by the words that you've chosen in the job advert.
Is that something you noticed when you were looking for jobs? Were there some where you thought, oh no, the way that's worded, and I don't think I'd want to work there?
So yes and no. I think sometimes you might not realise that the wording has put you off, has made you close that job application before you even finish reading it.
Yeah.
So there probably have been adverts that I've just kind of thought, nah, I don't think I can apply for that, or that doesn't look like the role for me. But on the other hand, I think just from a pragmatic level, I've got a hunch that if there were more part-time roles available, or if companies were willing to say on the job adverts, you know, this role is, we would consider applicants who want, you know, a part-time role or a full-time role, just be a bit more open to that kind of thing. Because already in the tech industry, there's actually really great flexibility in terms of remote working, flexi time, and all of those things can be a really great benefit in terms of attracting, you know, female talent, and male talent as well. You know, so let's put that out there. That it's not just women that want flexible working, yeah. But I think it can help if you find that you're not attracting females to the role, just addressing those kinds of things. Yeah, and then even, you know, once you've got through the door and you've got an application in with that company, you've then got to get through the recruitment process as well. And if there's a lot of unconscious bias in that filtering, then, you know, that company might find that they're selecting for the wrong reasons, you know, and that's going to limit their talent pool, isn't it? So there's a lot that companies can do to address the talent that they're attracting. Personally, I think it's a bit lazy when companies say, oh, but there aren't actually enough women for us to recruit. That's why we've got, you know, that's why our diversity is low. Yeah. So I think, okay, that is part of the challenge that they face, is that there may be more, you know, more males out there who are applicable to, you know, to apply for the roles. But, you know, most technical roles, if you think a bit out of the box in terms of how you can recruit for it, and just making sure that you're not limiting the people who can apply for that role for the wrong reasons. So if you're limiting for the right reasons, obviously, you know, you need to be selecting for excellence and talent and technical expertise and whatnot. But if you're also limiting for the wrong reasons, then you're only ever going to end up recruiting the same type of person. And that's when you'll find, I think, that the diversity in your talent pool is going to decrease. But then in terms of grassroots, I think things are improving, aren't they? Like, you know, there are more opportunities and people are awake to the fact that, you know, you can't just, it's not just a job for the boys, and we can't just let one type of person get all the way through the pipeline of, you know, training and getting the experience and then getting a job. So I think things are improving, and organisations like SheCanCode and all the support networks that are out there can only help, I think. Yeah.
Yes, I definitely agree. Things are moving. There is still a long way to go, but I agree there is definitely a lot of support out there now than there used to be. And thank you so much, Becca. We're already out of time. And thank you so much for talking to us today and sharing your story. It's been a pleasure. And to everybody listening, as always, thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you again next time.